Hello there, and welcome once again to an exploration of Gurdjieff's teachings. I've dug up an old story of Gurdjieff's healing abilities, and I'll read it out later on. Today people talk often about saving the world, and it's interesting to consider what would really be meant by that. Gurdjieff saw our position quite uniquely. He says, "The evolution of large masses of humanity is opposed to nature's purposes. The evolution of a certain small percentage may be in accord with nature's purposes. Man contains within him the possibility of evolution, but the evolution of humanity as a whole, that is, the development of these possibilities in all men, or in most of them, or even in a large number of them, is not necessary for the purposes of the earth, or of the planetary world in general, and it might in fact be injurious or fatal. There exist therefore special forces of a planetary character, which oppose the evolution of large masses of humanity, and keep it at the level it ought to be. For instance, the evolution of humanity beyond a certain point, or to speak more correctly, above a certain percentage, would be fatal for the moon. The moon at present feeds on organic life. Humanity is a part of organic life. This means that humanity is food for the moon. If all men were to become too intelligent, they would not want to be eaten by the moon. But at the same time, possibilities of evolution exist, and they may be developed in separate individuals with the help of appropriate knowledge and methods. Such development can take place only in the interests of the man himself against, so to speak, the interests and forces of the planetary world. This evolution is necessary only to the man himself. No one else is interested in it, and no one is obliged or intends to help him. On the contrary, the forces which oppose the evolution of large masses of humanity also oppose the evolution of individual men. A man must outwit them, and one man can outwit them. Humanity cannot. Evolution is the result of conscious struggle. Nature does not need this evolution. It does not want it and struggles against it. Well, this week I felt that I was punished by karma, and also on a particular day I felt a lift. These small events, these small adjustments made to me from the outside, feel very impersonal. I was trying to picture to myself what it might mean if you populated a planet with humanity in order to feed the moon. And what you could do is to have them fantasize all the time. And if they do, they create something, which is a simulation of the real world. And that shimmering material that human beings create in their heads, those fantasies, are a kind of material that could potentially feed the moon. I am not convinced that anybody on this planet has ever really understood things. The difficulty, I suppose, always is, according to the law of three, that it is simply very difficult to connect together elements from different planes, from different sides. Intellectual development has simply a very different nature to emotional development, and that has a very different nature to physical development. They are three separate worlds, and you would have to have a long life and a lot of effort to develop each of these three and then join them together. Few people do that. And so I think it remains an open question whether humanity can be saved. Now let's listen to Gurdjieff talk about the three types of food that we consume. He says, "The human organism receives three kinds of food: the ordinary food we eat, the air we breathe, and our impressions. It is not difficult to agree that air is a kind of food for the organism, but in what way impressions can be food may appear at first difficult to understand. We must, however, remember that with every external impression, whether it takes the form of sound or vision or smell, we receive from outside a certain amount of energy, a certain number of vibrations. This energy which enters the organism from outside is food. Moreover, as has been said before, energy cannot be transmitted without matter. If an external impression brings external energy with it into the organism, it means that external matter also enters, which feeds the organism in the full meaning of the term. For its normal existence, the organism must receive all three kinds of food, that is, physical food, air, and impressions. The organism cannot exist on one or even two of these kinds of foods. All three are required. But the relation of these foods to one another and their significance for the organism is not the same. The organism can exist for a comparatively long time without a supply of fresh physical food. Of course, starvation of this kind cannot be considered as complete, since in all cases of such artificial starvation, people have taken water. Nevertheless, even without water, a man can live without food for several days. Without air, he can exist only for a few minutes, not more than 2 or 3. As a rule, a man dies after being 4 minutes without it. Without impressions, a man cannot live a single moment. If the flow of impressions were to be stopped in some way, or if the organism were deprived of its capacity for receiving impressions, it would immediately die. The flow of impressions coming to us from outside is like a driving belt communicating motion to us. The principal motor for us is nature, the surrounding world. Nature transmits to us, through our impressions, the energy by which we live and move and have our being. If the inflow of this energy is arrested, our machine will immediately stop working. Thus, of the 3 kinds of food, the most important for us is impressions, although it stands to reason that a man cannot exist for long by impressions alone. Impressions and air enable a man to exist a little longer. Impressions, air, and physical food enable the organism to live to the end of its normal term of life, and to produce the substances necessary not only for the maintenance of life, but also for the creation and growth of higher bodies. Well, there are many interesting things to consider here. Once again, we see ourselves in the cradle of nature, and hardly as independently as we may imagine. And our possibilities of life depend on our sensitive contact to the nature around us. Certainly, since the lockdowns and the mass tattooing that the English people are doing to themselves these days, I notice how harmful it is to look at this self-destruction. Many of them seem poisonous. And on the internet, something quite shocking is that the big companies now spray at you images of diseased people in order to shock you, as if they hadn't explored the dregs of the barrel enough. But seeing diseased people, like those that the NGOs routinely try to blackmail you with, is in fact very harmful. Looking at healthy people is healing. Looking at the cross is healing. Looking at classical architecture is healing. Looking at beauty is healing. But the Western world we know has been turned completely upside down and is being driven by a sense of filth. And you have to take action against this harm. People live with great bravado, but they simply do not know what is happening to them. They have a terrible habit of replacing traditions and institutions and practices with shallow copies of a low order. And when those shallow copies no longer work, they say, "Oh, we've tried everything," and eventually feel desperate, as if there is nothing they can do. But a superior man has to always recognize that what is presented to him is a shallow copy, And so he must always be pressing towards the source of things, accepting what is given, but then returning it towards its golden age. That is a hero. A man that whatever he touches, no matter how large or how small, he returns it by his own hands to the golden age. That is a hero. That is a hero of the ordinary life. That is an alchemist. And now for those tales of power. These come from the Women of the Rope. About this time I saw 2 examples of Mr. Gurdjieff's power, which I have decided to disclose. One day after luncheon, he led me into his room and told me to stand at the window with my back to him. He remained at the door. He said, "Relax all body. If head or any part wishes to move, let move. I wish to make experiment and at the same time give you something." In a few seconds my head began to move from side to side and up and down slowly. Then a wide hot ray or wave struck my neck with force and moved down, then up my spine. Startled, I said, "Oh, you're touching me." "No," he replied from the door. A minute later he said, "Now enough." He left the room with no explanation and never referred to this again. In another example, I brought him a woman with creeping paralysis who had been given up by all doctors in London and Switzerland. They said she would die within the year. Mr. Gurdjieff said he could not cure her because screw was broken, but he could save her life. Every day he or I gave her injections, and he taught me how to treat her with a complicated electric machine that had to be polarized differently on different days. She walked with great difficulty, dragging her feet. One day he told me to bring her into his room. I helped her in a chair and started towards the door. He said to me, "Not necessary, go." I turned at the moment his arms stretched towards her and downwards in a swift gesture. "Dormez, madame," he said. Her eyes closed at once. For perhaps 3 or 4 minutes he stood before her, passing his hands from her head to her feet at the distance of 2 feet or less. Then he called, "Madame," and she opened her eyes. After a question or 2 about her health, he told me to take her away. I went to assist her, but she rose from her chair and walked quickly to the door, to the front door, down the stairs and into the street. I caught her up and walked by her side. "Je me demande pourquoi il n'a rien fait pour moi aujourd'hui. I wonder why he didn't do anything for me today," she said. She did not know she had slept. She did not notice she was walking. In the taxi she scarcely spoke. She left it without my aid. Usually it was necessary for me and the chauffeur both to get her in or out of a car, and at her hotel she easily climbed the stairs. Finally I said to her, "You seem to be walking better today." "Tiens, why so I am." The next morning she was as before. Part of this mystery is that she never once, then or later, asked me what had happened. She did not ever walk again, nor did she die. She is living in Switzerland today. Well, there are certainly many things to learn if you want to. In my own work, a couple of weeks ago I extended the work with the 3 centres to include the shafts and the reins. That kind of work requires a great deal of training with the body and also with feelings, which people are not used to. Working directly with feelings is something very few people do. They usually do them with the intermediary of art. And if the centres are so developed, they can be harnessed together. Now, in the art of Tai Chi, it is said that you begin by moving the physical body. Later, you move the Qi, the astral body, and then the physical body follows. And later than that, it is your intention that directly causes the chi to move, and then the body follows that. That is a very high level of development that seems to be possible. From this point of view, the level humanity has got to, it's as if they are dragging their carriage around manually. That is how people move their body normally, and it is exhausting. There are some people in society who move more like an animal. Those people are closer to the moving center, and the moving center is more developed. But that's not what I'm talking about. In the Chinese arts, they say the form of mind. No doubt this would require an extreme amount of development, and you would have to really want it. What for, I'm not sure. In the famous plus-minus diagram, many things are not shown. People of the world either drag their carriage around, or they order it about using will. For instance, somebody who goes to the gym regularly and orders their body to do 200 press-ups. Their will sends a signal, and the body, like a slave, responds. But there is nothing spiritual about that, because spirituality involves the light of a higher world entering inside. I do hear people in the fourth way who imagine that the fourth way is the use of will, is about overcoming things with the will. But using the will in that way is only one. It's one, and then one again. But the spiritual path is not one. It is 1, 2, 3. And the 3 is like an arrow that pierces from beyond. In this American-dominated world, there are no values apart from chasing the dollar. But that's not how it was in the West, meaning in Europe. There, what people wanted was a sense of life of a higher kind, and that they could recognize. Nobility, if you like. And what that actually is the feeling of the astral body. Whether they understood it or not, knew it or not, Western culture, meaning the culture of continental Europe, aimed for that feeling of nobility that is in fact the sense of the astral body. And for that, people lived and died, and they did not worry. They did not live in fear, they did not live in the worry that America is spreading through the world. I think that's enough for this week. You all take care.